A very good evening to you. Welcome to Biz First. You're with me, Azra San. And tonight on our show is a very special guest. And that is the Regional Manager of the United Nations Volunteers Program for the Asia and the Pacific, Miss Selena Mia. A very good evening to you, madam.
Good evening, Esra. Thank you very much for having me here with you.
And it is a pleasure to have you here with us. So, Selena, now 11 years of service in the United Nations. 1 year, almost a year, as the Regional Manager for this program. Tell us a bit about yourself and our viewers about yourself.
Well, I'm actually originally from Bangladesh. I grew up in Belgium. I graduated in law. I started my career as a lawyer. And I joined the United Nations, as you said, around 11 years ago with the United Nations Development Program in New York as a lawyer working on financing agreements. And then I moved in this region, in Bangkok, a few years ago for an associated program of the UNDP, which is UNCDF, the United Nations Capital Development Fund, as the manager for Asia Pacific. And 2 years after that, I moved to the current organization where I am, which is the United Nations Volunteers Program, which is also administered by the UNDP. We are actually a subset of UNDP. I started as the partnership head and resource mobilization specialist in our headquarters in Germany, Bonn. And more or less a year ago, I started this job now at the regional office in Bangkok, covering the whole of Asia Pacific.
So what's the speciality about the United Nations volunteers? Tell us a bit about this particular subset of the UNDP.
Well, what we do, our mandate is twofold. We were established in 1970 by the General Assembly, and we started our operations back in 1971. And our mandate is really to promote volunteerism around the world, to make sure that people around the world have the opportunity to volunteer and contribute their time selflessly to help others. So really for peace and development. When we started originally, we really had a big influx from people from the north coming to the south, helping with their expertise. The second part of our mandate is really to actually deploy, as we say, place United Nations volunteers in the UN system. Make sure that all the UN agencies have in their workforce some United Nations volunteers, national and international specialists or youth volunteers, to help them contribute to their work and achieve the sustainable development goals.
So are there any categories to be joining your organization as a volunteer? Anything in particular that you're considering when joining someone into your organization?
Yes, actually we try to place these volunteers in the different UN agencies. So we work with our partner, the UN agencies, like all of them. We work with more than 38 agencies, so UNICEF, UNDP, UNFPA, UNHCR, the peace missions, and other agencies, IOM, UN Women, all of them basically. And we work in all the three pillars of development, so peace, development, and humanitarian effort. If we look at the figures, last year we deployed 6,501 volunteers worldwide in 131 countries, and our volunteers came from 150 nationalities. If you look at the trend, we actually see a growing trend of national volunteers in this region and also more volunteers from the south. So right now in our cohort, we have 83% of our volunteers that are coming from the south. When I said in the beginning, it was really the north coming to the south. Right. Now you can see the shift in the balance. What we do is we work with our UN partners and they tell us what kind of profiles they need to come into their workforce and help them with this spirit of volunteerism and this special dedication and passion that you bring to the job. So our volunteers can be, as I said, national or international. We have two main modalities, which is the specialist modalities. So these are for volunteers that are 25 years old and up, and they have usually a master's degrees and 3 to 5 years of experience.
So educated crowd.
Very educated, actually very talented, qualified people. And then we have the youth, because we were mandated by the previous Secretary General, Ban Ki-moon, with working with the youth, because you know there is a youth bulge in this particular area of the world, but overall. There are quite a lot of youth in the world, and we want to make sure that they also can volunteer and also get the first experience in the UN system. So the youth can be from 18 years old to 29 years old, and they can serve up to a maximum of 2 years in the UN system.
So, Selena, you arrived in Sri Lanka just 2-3 days ago to officiate the launch of the 2018 State of World's Volunteerism report. Tell us a bit about this special occasion that you attended here in Sri Lanka.
Well, it was a very good occasion. We actually launched the State of the World Volunteerism Report 2018 yesterday, a very successful program where we had the pleasure and the privilege to have many colleagues from different UN agencies. We had people, an esteemed panel made of academia, one actress, a very famous actress in this country. We had other people who are working in the field of volunteerism. We had lots of our volunteers, and we had also the volunteers from a program that we started in 2011, we call the V-Force. This report is a UN flagship report that is published every 3 years, and this year the title of the report is The Thread That Binds, and it focused on the resilience at the community level and volunteerism and resilience. How can volunteerism actually help communities build resilience in the face of shocks and stresses? And so I had the opportunity, the great pleasure to be here in Colombo to launch our report and to give a little bit an overview of the report. This is a report that includes 3 years of research and work. We actually worked with 15 communities in 15 countries. In fact, we covered 4 countries in this region, namely China, Myanmar, Philippines, and Sri Lanka. At different community levels, to see how do people and how are volunteers dealing with shocks and stresses. And the report was very comprehensive, because the first question that we wanted to cover is who are the world's volunteers, because you know volunteerism happens every day by neighbors, by people around you, and you don't really have to staple it as volunteerism. You just help each other.
Yeah.
So it was very challenging to gather the data, because there is a vacuum in terms of evidence on volunteerism. So our research over the 3 years has shown that in the world you have currently 1 billion people volunteering. And if you put this into perspective, that is equivalent to 109 million full-time workers. And if you put it even in a better perspective, that would be equivalent to 3 times the workforce in people working in the financial sectors, or 5 times people working in mining and extractive industries. And we have also seen that through this research, 70% of volunteerism is actually informal volunteerism, so with outside a particular organization, and 30% is in an organized fashion. So, for example, that would also be the UN volunteers, because they are in an organized, in an organization. In the world, another figure is 57% of women are volunteering. However, if we dive deep to Asia Pacific, this ratio is actually closer to the gender parity of 50-50, because we have 51% of female volunteering in Asia Pacific. And of course, the number of 57 it's higher in informal setting of volunteerism, because that would be a natural extension of caregiving. So these are some of the facts that we highlighted. For Asia Pacific, 28.7 million people are volunteering in Asia Pacific. So I think that's a very big number that also reflects the values system in this region, which is very similar in other regions in the world, where volunteerism is really anchored in the culture of people here.
Thank you, Selena, for giving us a comprehensive idea about what you do at your organization. We have a lot more to talk about, but we'll be back after this short commercial break. Welcome back to the show. I'm in conversation with Ms. Selena Mia, the Regional Manager of the United Nations Volunteers Program for Asia and the Pacific. Selena, we talk a lot about volunteering, volunteerism, and how can we instill the idea of volunteerism, as you have been in the field for more than 11 years, serving people, looking into their needs, making sure that their requirements are fulfilled. How do you think that we can specifically instill this idea of volunteerism in people?
Well, I think, let me speak about Sri Lanka. In Sri Lanka, I think there is a long history and a very rich culture of volunteerism. Of course, it's linked to religion, it's linked to the culture, the values of the society here in Sri Lanka. And I think volunteerism has to come from the heart. Mm-hmm. It's really about helping others. It's the best way of the altruism, of how I want to help selflessly somebody else just because I want to help. Yes. You know, and you see that in many of the disaster, people don't need to talk about it. When a disaster strike, people from all over just come and help. There is an outpour coming of generosity and help from each other. And this is really what volunteerism is about, is to help your next door neighbor, it's to help in your community, it's to help at the national level, at the regional level, at the global level, because you want to actually stop what you are doing and go ahead and help. If I take a few examples, like when we had the Ebola crisis in Sierra Leone and other African countries, we had, even through the United Nations Volunteers Program, we had doctors around the world who dropped what they were doing and they wanted to contribute to fight Ebola. And so they came and joined the UN and said, we want to go there in the most difficult areas, the most difficult place, just to help others. So it really truly has to come from the heart. And I think it's also very linked to the value system that you are surrounding yourself with. So I think you can also lead by example. If you see that somebody is actually helping someone else, you will also realize that while you think that by volunteering you only help the other person, you actually get a lot in return for yourself, because you get to learn about yourself. You get that happiness of doing something good.
The satisfaction.
Exactly. The satisfaction of doing something good for someone else without any return, expectation of any return. It's really a free will. And this is really part of the definition of volunteerism. It is an act that is done of free will without an expectation of a return.
Speaking of Sri Lanka, we saw how our general public, the people of this country, came forward when the country was affected by the heavy rains and the inclement weather, and how when we, Selena, we launched this program called the Sahanayatra during this flood situations, and we had a center here at the head office in Colombo, and we saw the number of people coming in from all walks of life, just carrying just a simple thing, just with the intention of helping someone. So from your point of view, where do you think Sri Lanka is standing when it comes to volunteerism?
Well, I think actually, as I said, in Sri Lanka there is a long history of volunteerism, and it's really in the culture. So it's ingrained in your DNA in Sri Lanka. We can see that because in Sri Lanka, if I just look at our program of the United Nations Volunteers Program, we have a steady growth of the number of volunteers who are in the UN system. And they work within the UN agencies, but sometimes they are also working at the government level when the UN agency has a program with a particular government. And you can see that right now, the average age of volunteers in Sri Lanka has dropped from, in 2010, it was 35 years old, and in 2018, this year is 27 years old. So you see that youth also find volunteerism as a response to actually help and contribute and do something for peace and development. And in Sri Lanka, we have also, back in 2011, we have started what we call a V-Force, which is really a program where we encourage people to register themselves if they want to help. And when the UN organizations in Sri Lanka are organizing events for awareness raising or data collection or any events where you need a lot of people, we just make a call for volunteers, and our V-Force volunteers just put their hands up, and they are eager to come and help without any expectation of others, just help in the mandate of that particular UN agency. Currently, we have more than 11,000 people registered in this V-Force. I think that is a testimony of the state of volunteerism and the spirit of volunteerism in this country.
As the UN, what are your recommendations when it comes to developing volunteerism in Sri Lanka?
Well, I think what one important part of volunteerism, which is also something that came out of our report, is that only volunteerism itself is not enough. You do need the government and the other development partners to put a few elements in the country in order to help volunteerism nourish and help safeguard the volunteers. So it is important to have an infrastructure that enables volunteerism. It is also important to have a fairer distribution of volunteerism. It shouldn't be that we, through volunteerism, we exacerbate existing inequalities, or marginalized people should also have access to the same opportunities for volunteerism. So if we look at the particular situation in Sri Lanka, I would say that there is currently a draft policy on volunteerism, which was drafted back in 2014. And this draft is under review currently with the relevant ministry. And I think it would be good going forward that this draft is then reviewed by all the stakeholders and submit to the cabinet for approval, because once you have the policy, then the government could also put in place the National Volunteer Secretariat, which will be the body that will actually help look into this infrastructure for volunteerism and make sure that all the volunteers are protected and there is a safe environment that enables positive volunteerism, resilient volunteerism. So I think that would be a good step forward for Sri Lanka.
Sri Lanka. Thank you, Selena. We have a lot more to talk about, but we'll be back after this short commercial break. Welcome back to the show. If you're just joining us, I'm in conversation with Ms. Selena Mia, the Regional Manager of the United Nations Volunteers Program for Asia and Pacific. Selena, now, like you rightly mentioned, the youth in the world now, they're highly educated, they know their responsibilities, and they are very much into this whole idea of volunteering and helping people in need. But we see some practical issues here. Now that they start, when they start their employment jobs and offices and all of that, they tend to find difficulties in making time for things like this. How do you make things easy for them?
Well, volunteerism doesn't have to be a 24/7 or a job 8 hours per day. You can really start with how much time you have to devote to volunteer. So for example, you could, what we have in the UN volunteer program, next to the volunteers that go to the field, we also have what we call an online volunteer platform. So there, I mean, if you have an hour per week to devote to volunteerism, you can really log in and look at those assignments that are there for one, which will require just an hour of your time. So I think you should really not, there is not one way to volunteer. I mean, there are different ways of volunteerism, and volunteerism is universal, but it really depends on the context where you are. Yes. So I think for the youth of today, if they have their own job, day job, what they could do, my suggestion would be to look at how they could maybe once a month or once a week try to contribute in their own way by volunteering for, as I said, 70% of volunteerism is informal, 30% is formal. So they could volunteer in an informal setting, or they could volunteer in a formal setting. It depends on how much time and interest they have to do that. But I think it is important to keep connected to volunteerism, because the values that it instills, and I think the happiness that it gives you in return, is the satisfaction, as you said, that it gives you in return, is something very important for also the self-esteem and to build yourself, and also to feel more confident that you are contributing for peace and development to help others. I think these values in today's world are actually quite important.
It is. And is it about the amount that you donate or the amount that you help people, or is it just a thought? I mean, some people might think that, you know, I would like to volunteer, but I may not be able to afford it. I may be a bit too young for this. I may not have enough the money, everything that is needed to go out and volunteer. Is that really the case?
We don't promote one way of volunteerism, really. We, again, as I said, it depends on the context, it depends on your status, your income, your nationality, your ethnicity, your age, your background. It depends on many things. So what I would encourage is maybe to see what works best for you, within your situation. I think one should not say that you should drop your daily job to go and only volunteer. No, but if you are interested in contributing, in helping others, maybe you should look around you, maybe in your immediate community, maybe in the region where you are, maybe in if you are working in a hospital, maybe in that area, maybe in your vicinity, look at those acts of volunteerism that you could actually carry on that would not jeopardize other activities that you have, but yet give you a sense of fulfillment and a sense of contribution to the society.
Selena, how about these established organizations? Can be in any form, private, public. How do you think they can support this whole idea of volunteerism?
Well, if we look at the private sector, for example, today in this world, we see that, for example, in the Sustainable Development Goals, one of the major differences with the Millennium Development Goals is that we cannot achieve these goals just by the governments or the multilaterals, for example, the UN agencies. We are not enough to do it. We really need strong partnerships, and that is the importance of Goal 17 of the Sustainable Development Goals. We need people from all walks of life to work together. So we need the civil societies, we need the NGOs, the private sector, the academia. We need everyone to come together, government, United Nations organization, other multilaterals, to come together in the pursuit of the achievement of the SDGs. So in that vein, you can see that throughout the world, many private sector entities are now within their CSR, their corporate social responsibilities, initiatives, they are actually giving time for their employees to then volunteer. Maybe once a month, maybe a few days a year, but they are actually making these changes to make sure that people can volunteer and then contribute to the SDGs. So I think we need different organizations. I mean, in many countries you have the volunteer involving organizations. I mean, we have many bigger players than us working in volunteerism, like Oxfam, the Red Cross and Red Crescent organizations in the world, and others. So there are plenty of organizations who are promoting the values of volunteerism and are helping, facilitating this volunteerism, right? Exchange at school level, at university level, or other level phase in your life where you can actually go in a school somewhere in a remote area, help and others. So I think there is not a shortage of people in need. There is not a shortage of opportunities to volunteers.
No restrictions. And anyone can come forward.
Exactly. Right? So we don't promote one way of volunteerism. We are there to promote volunteerism as a value system, as something that we think is good to contribute to peace and development in the world.
Thank you, Selena, for joining us on our show. Just one final question. What is the future plan? When are you planning to come back to Sri Lanka again?
Well, actually, since this trip was very short, I'm very happy that I have a next trip already in the making, which will be in February next year. As I said, the V-Force is one of the programs we launched in 2011. But in the same year, we also launched the V-Award, which is a very big event where we recognize individuals who are champions in volunteerism in different fields. So there are thematic prizes and there are other prizes in this V-Award, and we will be celebrating this V-Award in February next year. So I will be back soon.
Hoping to have you back soon. And that's it from us. And I was in conversation with Ms. Selena Mia, the Regional Manager of the United Nations Volunteers Program for the Asia and the Pacific. That's it for now. We'll be joining again you next week on our show. Signing off for now, I'm Azra San. Have a good night.